Aren't we ready to chit-chat now?
Yes.
Okay.
We need you to. What's your name again? Ma'am?
My name is Mary Louise Cecilia Ash Bean.
Is your real name, is that your really your full name? Cecilia?
Yes.
I did
What's that
not
your-
know that.
I'm not sure, but I
What's your
think that's,
confirmation name?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
that could be, I don't remember. Something
And-
about Cecilia.
Cecilia.
Yeah.
Cecilia.
I'm Mary Donahue.
Mary Donahue Bean.
Okay,
now
Mary Bean Donahue.
Mary Bean Donahue.
You weren't
Okay.
Mary something else? Mary Louise? Or
Mary Elizabeth Agnes Bean.
there, see?
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't have it all.
Right.
Now you do.
Okay, I'm going to start calling you Cecilia and you're going to be Agnes.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause St. Agnes, you know, we always studied about her in school. And she was a martyr when she was real young. And, the nuns just loved her, you know.
St. Agnes. That's
Mhm.
funny. I don't remember that.
I'd always get to stand up in the front of the class when we discussed St. Agnes, you know.
Well, I probably did for St. Cecilia.
Yeah. But those were names we got to pick ourselves because it was confirmation name. You know,
Okay.
by then you were old enough that you could ask for it.
Okay. We were already talking about a lot of the kind of stuff that we want to kind of catch, so just the first thing I would like to hear, because I think I've heard stories from both of you. You're both the youngest girl in a family with all boys,
All brothers.
other than you.
Right.
What was it like growing up with, Bob and Frank and Dick and Bill and Jack and Ken and Bob,
At times you wouldn't want to relive it, and then other times you thank God you had those big brothers, you know.
Right. There to protect you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we had a pesky little kid in the neighborhood named Spud Handbeater. And he was always trying to beat somebody up. So when he showed up around the playground over there, which we used to have, you were always glad your brothers were around.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my brothers just thought that I was just a spoiled, rotten baby.
Yeah, she gets to do things we never got to do. I'd hear that.
Well, you guys were the precious little princess.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. But then by the same token, you'd want to do something. And Dad'd say, no, you can't do that. And I'd say, Dick and Bill did. Well, you're not a boy. So it had its drawbacks too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were born in St. Louis?
Yes.
Okay, so where and kind of
Well,
about you growing up and
to
anything you can
begin,
think
let
of.
me tell you in the beginning, my mother spoiled me rotten because her first baby was a little girl, and she only lived a very, very short time.
Oh, how sad. Yeah.
And her name was Rosemary. And that is why I named my first daughter Rosemary.
Sure.
Yeah.
And she paved the way for the rest of us.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what part of St. Louis?
It would have been considered well, maybe at the time it was maybe in the center, but it was in the hospital, and the name of the hospital right now I can't think of it, but it was eventually moved out to the outer part of St. Louis. Most of the hospitals from the early times, they kept the name and they moved the hospitals out in the county.
Okay. And that part of St. Louis that you grew up in was kind of
The part that then my grandmother lived very close to that hospital, but we later on moved to another part of St. Louis, which was closer to schools, Catholic schools, and Mother wanted us to go to Catholic schools, so that's why we moved. It's kind of was the center then, but it's not now, I don't think.
And that's the one that was your house was over not far off of Grand.
Right, it was just off of Grand.
And what was this, the
McCree.
McCree? Do you remember your house number? You've told me before, but
I think it was 3633.
Mary, where were you born? Were you born here in Sedalia?
I was
or-
born at 2:30
Oh, that's
in-
right,
in
230.
this house.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
I've gone
right.
That's
full
right.
circle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
Haven't
lived-
moved very far in the world.
Well, you did, but you moved back. you
That's
know.
right. Yeah.
What do either of you remember? Let's go back to your parents, grandparents, anything you can remember that they've told you as far as, you know, where your grandparents were born and where they were buried, or, you know, anything you can share about the previous generations that came
My
before you.
last grandparent died 2 days after I was born, so I never knew any of them.
Okay.
They lived in St. Charles. Dad's parents lived, I guess, in Moline or Peoria.
Well, they're in Bloomington, Illinois for a little while. Well, that's where they're buried. That's where Michael's buried.
In Bloomington? Okay.
Yeah.
Then that must be where Mrs. Behrens has a nephew, because she was telling me they were up there at this little boy. He was crossing the street with his mother and dad, and a car came around the corner and hit him, and they both were trying to pull him out of the way,
Oh.
and
great.
each one of them had the poor little kid's hand.
Mhm.
Anyhow, when they went to the cemetery there, she said she saw Dad's father's grave.
Okay.
It was right by that little boy.
Okay. And Mary Lou, your family, you were just talking about your grandparents and moved from St. Louis to what? Marshall and
Well, first of all, though, my grandmother and my two uncles moved to St. Louis because Mother had moved to St. Louis. And Mother's brothers couldn't find jobs here in Sedalia, so
that was Harold and Bill.
Harold and Bill.
Okay.
And so Mother found out that they could probably get on. They were good at doing office work, and they Missouri Pacific Railroad was looking for office workers in St. Louis, and so they moved. My grandmother and my uncles moved to St. Louis, and they, like I said, they lived near the hospital there where I was born. But then when my grandmother died,
Which
She-
grandmother was that?
Mother's mother,
Okay.
she wanted to be buried with the rest of her family over in Marshall. And her brother was the man who ran the cemetery. And I did know his name, but right now I can't think of it. So anyway, and then when my mother had her first child, the little girl, and she died, Mother didn't know any cemetery other than over in Marshall, so she had the nurses she gave a little dress that she was going to bring the baby home in, gave it to the nurses and asked them to put it on her, and then they put her in a little baby casket, and she was shipped on the train to Marshall and buried over there.
And they didn't go with her.
No, Mother was still in the hospital.
Yeah.
At that time, they kept
They
you
kept
in
you
the
in
hospital
the
a while.
week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then when my grandmother died, she wanted to be buried over there.
So then when did you guys move to Sedalia? Tell me about that.
Well, my uncles hated working in an office all the time in downtown St. Louis. They wanted to get back to Sedalia where, houses weren't so close together, and my dad decided he didn't like St. Louis either. He wanted to move, so they all agreed to move back to Sedalia. And my uncles bought that farm, and they were going to be farmers. And my dad was going to get a job in Sedalia. He thought he could get one, and he did. But anyway, they still had that house over there, Washington. You remember when they
Oh, yeah.
were over there? Okay. And so they lived there until they got a house built on the farm. They lived on the farm, and Dad had some kind of a job with the railroad here, and it wasn't doing good, and so he asked if he could go in with him on the farm. And they'd go out there every day, and then finally they got a little house built, and they moved out there. And we moved into the house. The house was all ours, but anyway, that's how we came to be in Sedalia.
And you just grew up here. This is where you've lived the rest of it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Bob and Ken both were in high school. Bob had already, I think he maybe had 1 year left, but he went ahead and left the high school he was going to. And Ken came here and started going to high school and was in Mary's class, the
At
first
Sacred
class
Heart?
at
Okay.
Sacred Heart.
No, he was 2 or 3 grades behind me.
Oh, was he?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
But he liked it over there, man. Everybody seemed to like him.
Yeah.
Girls were calling him all the time.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun.
Quite the ladies' man, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
So-
always.
So Bob went to Smith Cotton.
Uh-huh.
No,
Oh,
Bob.
you're Bob. Yeah.
Yeah, we got too many Bobs going.
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. My brother Bob graduated, he didn't graduate because we left St. Louis too soon.
Okay.
But he went to a Catholic high school up there, and right now I can't think of the name of it, but he went to high school up there. And when he came to Sedalia, 2 months after he was here, he got noticed to go to the Army.
Okay. And how long was he in the Army?
Maybe 2 years, maybe not, I can't remember.
But that wasn't during wartime, was it?
Yeah,
Oh, it was?
they had started, yeah.
Did he get shipped out overseas, or did he stay stateside, or?
I think he got to stay stateside now, I'm not sure. I can't remember.
What about Ken?
Well, later on then, Ken finally got into it, but he wasn't drafted, he was volunteered to go to, what's the place south of China?
Korea.
Korea.
Yeah.
He went to the Korean War.
Okay, that's right.
He
I do
was in
remember
that.
Okay. In the Army?
Yeah.
Okay. Mary,
Mm-hmm.
what do you remember about growing up with your brothers? I mean, someone moved out by the time you got old enough
Well,
to kind of remember things? Or?
Frank was pretty well grown up, and he always had a couple of jobs and an old car.
Okay.
And it seemed like he was going with Jane from the time I remember,
Okay. What were his jobs?
He worked up at the smokehouse. It was a pool room, and I think they did a lot of gambling
Mm-hmm.
because Frank saw this guy make all kind of money. And So he went down to Main Street and bought a place and opened up what he thought was just like the smokehouse.
Yeah, and Ken was working for him.
Well, the state came in, and closed him down. And of course, old Charlie McHenry, he paid him off, so they never bothered him. But Frank didn't know that. So Frank's experiences with his gambling joint didn't last too long. I remember on Christmas Eve, Jane came in and had the kids and all the packages, and Dad says, "Where's your husband?" She said, "Your son is in jail." The state had come down there and they were gambling, and so they just hauled Frank in. I think he got out before the evening was over because it was Christmas Eve, but yeah. But yeah, growing up with the boys was, they were all so different. Bob was quiet and kind. Jack just tormented the devil out of me when he was young. I remember saying, "I'll be glad when you go away to be a priest."
They must have straightened him out quite a bit.
I guess, yeah.
Kim was working down there for Frank, and Frank had the little dinner place going, and then upstairs they were gambling.
Yeah.
And Kim
yeah.
was up there running the gambling thing
Yeah.
for him.
I remember Jane and I and Frank came down 3rd Street one time, and Frank said, "Oh, I got to pick up Ken." And Jane said, "Where?" And he stopped in front of Sacred Heart, and Ken comes bouncing out with his books. And Jane said, "What are you doing in there?" He said, "I go to school." She said, "You go to school?" Because Kenny looked so much older than his age. She thought he was close to their age.
Here he was down there working for Frank.
Oh.
That's funny.
But
And
Dick and I were real buddies, because Bill and Jack were just like that. And that's why Dad always thought, Bill went into seminary for a couple of years. But Dad always did say he thought Bill went in because Jack did, that
yeah,
it wasn't really a vocation.
it didn't really rub off on Bill. Huh?
No.
Yeah.
And he would pull pranks over at the seminary, like somebody bet him he wouldn't jump off of a balcony somewhere. And they said, "I'll give you all my pie or all my dessert for a week, if you will." And Bill just went out and jumped off. He could have broken a leg or something. Anyhow, the priest wrote to Dad and said, "Billy is a fine boy, but I don't think he has a vocation."
Yeah, I remember hearing the stories about Bill not quite cutting it in seminary.
Oh, no.
That's funny.
It was kind of funny when you think about it, how connected your family and my family were. And then here, Bob and I got married.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought that?
Yeah, yeah.
I think nobody that knew Bob thought he'd ever get married, did they?
Well, how did that transpire? I mean, that's, to me, pretty interesting in itself.
Well, Jim Myers and Bob were real good friends, and they did things together all the time. And Jim decided to get some of these things that you rode on in the water. What do I want to say?
Water skis?
Water skis, yeah. And so he got some of these water skis, and then they invited some different ones that they knew to come down there and try it, And Gene Summers had bought the boat, and Jim got the water skis, and so we all started going down there, and there was Oda, and there was Lois, who married Gene Summers.
Was Oda with Danny at the
And
time?
Oda, yeah, Danny was down there some. That's kind of how she got together with Danny, and Danny thought Bob never would get married, so he always ran around with Bob. And then when Bob got married, then Danny decided, well, he guess he
might
would.
as well get And Danny had terrible luck with women. He really did. He went with that Shirley White, and of course she had a stable of guys on the street, And then he went with Elaine Paxton, and all they did was fight. It was really comical. So I went with that Donahue kid, not Joe, but another one that I went to school with. And we'd go out with them a lot, and they'd always get in a fight, and he'd like just take off her ring and throw it wherever we were. And Zeke and I'd end up looking for the damn ring while Danny chased her out the front door. It was crazy. So it was kind of a relief that those two didn't get married. I think they might have killed each other.
Well, I'm sure Oda's glad that he didn't marry her too.
Yeah, yeah.
So you and Bob hooked up through the skiing parties down at the
That's
lake.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a real click.
And Bob never would water ski.
But he always went down
He
there.
always wanted to go, yeah.
Uh-huh.
He'd run the boat or he'd do anything, but he didn't want to water ski.
And Bob was the best swimmer of all of us.
Really?
Uh-huh. When we were down there at Crystal Lake, you know, Bob could dive in and be across the lake before you hardly, and the rest of us would just kind of paddle along, you know, get over to Waddell's dock.
Right.
But Bob was really a strong swimmer.
Speaking of Crystal Lake, I mean, we used to go down there, you know, anytime Dick would come into town or sometimes
Yeah.
Frank, we'd go down there. I have no recollection of where exactly that is.
Do you know where Stover is?
North Stover is.
Okay, it's 7 miles past Stover.
On what highway?
We walked.
I know that's picking your brain good, but just...
Yeah, 'cause it was a country road.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd walk in. You know, I'd take the girls and some of my friends down there. And that was after the folks had sold theirs. And Mr. and Miss Waddell were so good to me. They'd always tell me, bring anybody down. But that was a fun place to grow up. God, we had good times down there.
Yeah, sounds like it. What? Any stories you remember from that? What sticks out in your mind most?
Oh, that cave was so interesting.
Yeah, it had a little cave.
Yeah.
That was neat.
Yeah.
And we always thought it belonged to an old farm woman that lived down there, and everybody depicted her as a witch. And Miss Brown. And the kids always thought Mrs. Brown didn't want us in that cave. And for some reason she didn't like fireworks. So I was down there with Dick and Bill, I think, one time, and they were shooting off fireworks at the front of the cave.
Oh.
And all of a sudden they just took off, and I'm sitting in there in the cave, and I look, and here comes Mrs. Brown. And oh, she was so mad. She's giving me the devil, and you always knew you didn't tattle. You know, so I didn't dare tell her that the boys had shot off the fireworks. I was probably about 8 years old. Oh.
Yeah, I remember hearing a lot of stories about Crystal Lake.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, I marvel. My mother couldn't swim a stroke. And she would go down there, and Dad, we had a big old 1928 Buick. And he'd load up that car, and we'd go down to the lake. And then Dad'd come back Monday morning and go to work, and he'd work all week. And Mother'd be down there with all of us. And, you know, I think she'd be scared to death to be down there with 6 kids that were always playing around the water.
Bob said she didn't mind putting stuff in some kind of a place to keep it cool.
Yeah.
And there'd be snakes, and
I
she
know.
didn't bother about them at all. She'd just take something and just chop them.
Yeah, I remember Dick came and I came in one day and we had a Cairo metal, we used to get Cairo syrup in a metal can. And we had this can, and Dick said, I've got the prettiest snake you ever saw, Mom. And he opened that can and shook it out, and she just had this little hatchet and just chopped its head off. It was a copperhead. Yeah. Didn't seem to bother her any, you know. And God knows she didn't grow up, you know, with any kind of background like that. Because in fact, Mother could be kind of a snob sometimes, you know. her folks, I guess her dad had a real good job with that American Car and Foundry down, and so they lived in this beautiful old home down there.
This is your mom.
Mm-hmm. So she didn't, as far as lake life or romping through the woods or anything like that, that was certainly something she didn't do when she was a kid much, I don't think.
Seems like back in those days, people just kind of adapted themselves to
I think
whatever,
so, yeah.
Maybe better than they do now, I don't know.
There was a woman down there whose husband owned a bookstore here in Sedalia. Their name was Klein. And somewhere she got these 2 grass hula skirts. And so the Boy Scouts had a camp right on the other side of the dam when we were down there. And they'd be down there for probably 6 weeks during the summer. And you'd hear the taps at night, and the kids could come up and swim in the lake. But Mother and Mrs. Klein, the Boy Scouts, would come up and they'd have a campfire. And they'd do that about, I guess, once a week up there, where all the families lived around there. So Mother and Miss Klein just practiced and practiced. They had, I don't know if somebody played the ukulele or something, but they practiced this hula dance they were going to do at the campfire. And the night comes, neither one of them would do it. Dad was just so disgusted with her. There we've been putting up with all their practices.
What do you remember about growing up in this area? Because the Myers and the Beans,
Yeah.
and I don't know, Bob and Ken and you, I don't know if when you were younger you got together with that gang or you were in the. Well, I mean, do you have any stories and recollections about?
There was a Myers, and then Genevieve Moore lived next door, and Spud Handfeeder, and Bobby Bull, and then down on 3rd Street, Noreen, the gal Bill married.
Okay.
Her family lived down there. Whittington lived down there. It just seemed like this whole neighborhood, a lot of them were Sacred Heart people.
Right.
I think a lot of people then moved around here because people walked too.
Yeah.
And it was a fun neighborhood to grow up in. Yeah, every night somebody was over here playing kick the can.
So with Frank, tell me about what he grew up here. He worked at the, what did you call the bar? What's the name of the bar again, or the gambling house?
Well, he worked out at Smokehouse for years. He worked
Okay.
for Charlie McHenry.
So what did he end? He ended up living in Indiana. Where all did he live
Well,
throughout his life?
Dick bought a shoe store in Indiana, in a department store up there. And I don't know what Frank had been doing, but Dick came home one summer and he talked Frank into coming back up there and working with him in that shoe store. So Frank, it didn't work out too well. And then Dick, they lived in Bloomington, and then Frank and Jane decided they wanted to move over to a little town called Ellettsville, and it was probably 20 miles from Bloomington. So Frank decided there was a shoe store over there, and I guess he bought it. But it was a little town. Bloomington was considered, the college town, the shopping town. Right. So it was a real, and I think that's when Frank got in the insurance business and did real well.
He sold life insurance, right? Okay.
Yeah. And I think they were starving when he was in that shoe store, And Dick always said the problem was he had those girls. And Dick said the girls go in there and pick out 3 and 4 pair of shoes and just walk out with them, And Frank wouldn't say anything. So I don't know if that was his demise in the shoe business, but
Well, I'll have to try to make sure Debbie gets to see this video because she'll be.
oh yeah, she'll get a kick out of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what he served in the military, or did he? Was he the
No.
only one that didn't? Him
Frank.
and Jack.
Frank went to, where was that? He went to work at a plant that was a defense plant. So, you know, you were automatically deferred if you worked in a defense plant, but Frank was married too. So when they were drafting guys, they didn't draft the married guys right away, you know.
Okay.
So, but Jack was deferred because he was a seminarian.
Okay. I'd never even made that connection, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Bob and Bill,
Did
They-
they
they
get drafted? They
volunteered.
volunteered?
Yeah.
Okay.
and they volunteered before the war started.
What do you remember? What did they volunteer at the same time? They go in
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah. And Mr. and Mrs. Berry lived down on 3rd and Missouri. And he was, what was it, the National Guard was what Berry was in. And I think he talked Bill and Bob into going to the National Guard because they'd get $21 a month. Boy, wasn't expensive, $21. Because if you were in the National Guard, you were signed up for
Right
the
away
Army.
went in, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when did they end up getting shipped overseas? Do you
Well,
remember what year
they
that was?
went in about 6 months before the war started. They were in the National Guard. And those guys would go down there, it was down on 2nd Street. And they'd go down there and practice marching and stuff. You know, it was kind of a joke, I think, at
Playing
the time.
at being soldiers.
Yeah, yeah. But then when Pearl Harbor happened,
Yeah.
you know, that was the real thing.
Yeah, and then all those outfits that they had for them to wear were in pretty bad shape, but
they
it's
were
all
World-
they had.
Yeah, World War One.
And they called them the raggedy ass militia.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they were a joke.
And so you would have been, let's see, that would have been what year? 30? No,
Let's see,
41,
the war started in 41.
41. Yeah, that's when
Yeah.
when the United States went in. So
Yeah,
you would have been,
so they probably
23.
joined in 40.
okay.
Yeah.
So he'd have been about 23 and Bill would have been,
Yeah, Bill was 17, I think, when he joined.
okay,
So he was probably 18 by the time
okay.
the war broke out. Because I think Dad had to sign for him even to go in the National Guard.
Because he was under 18?
Yeah,
Okay. So about the time he was getting shipped over there, Mary Lou, you were what, 10?
Probably.
9 or 10?
Yeah. No, I was 12 when I moved to Sedalia, so.
I was just trying to figure. But
what year did you all move down here?